Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on getting started in test automation with regression testing. Your presenter is Andreas Vaschnig, Vice President for Customer Success at Ranorex. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Jackie King, and I'm with Ranorex. And I'd like to welcome you again to the webinar. And we want to make this as interactive as possible. So I'd like to encourage you to use the Q&A panel to submit any questions that you have during the webinar. With us in the presentation today, we also have Robert Prem from our support staff, and he'll be answering your questions as the webinar progresses. So you don't need to wait until the end, although we do plan a live Q&A session at the end as well, time permitting. And the webinar is being recorded. Following the conclusion of the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link where you can watch the recording again or share it with others on your team. Now, a quick look at our agenda for today. Andreas is going to start with a presentation on the principles of regression testing, and then he'll follow that with a live demonstration of regression testing with Ranorex Studio, including some best practices for regression testing. And then at the end, we'll have a live Q&A session, but as I mentioned earlier, go ahead and ask any questions that you have in our Q&A panel. And finally, as I mentioned before, the webinar is being recorded. So Andreas, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you now.
Thank you, Jackie. You can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. I should say good morning and good afternoon, depending on from where you join this webinar. Again, my name is Andreas, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys about regression testing and how to do it with Ranorex Studio. As Jackie mentioned before, I'm going to start with a couple of slides to introduce regression testing, the principles and the techniques, that come with regression testing and, why we do it in the first place. And then I will jump right into Ranorex Studio, to show you guys how you can do it with the Ranorex product and how you can create regression testing or test cases or actually enter a test suite with using Ranorex. So let's start with this little fellow tester here or / developer, understanding regression testing. So what is regression testing and why do we need this and why it's so important? So the first picture on the left, our little tester is trying to understand what the new feature does. Not many requirements available that he can probably read through, so he needs to figure this out, chasing down people and all kind of information. But finally, the second picture, he's able to test it. Perfect, everything is working. That new feature is working as expected, as defined. Everything is great. So we're gonna release the software. We're gonna release the product. Everyone is happy. The third picture from the left, you can see releasing the software equals opening the door to the house. So we release the software, we're all happy, right? So we walk away with a happy face. And well, what we didn't realize and what we didn't see is that we, while releasing the new software, the new change code, we introduced, what do we have here? Three or four new bugs, and we don't even know about it. So we are, perfectly set up for a call from our clients or your clients, with the message that they have a problem. So how do we prevent this? And or we have in the testing world, in the testing software testing world, we have a technique called regression testing to avoid this from happening, actually. So we all understand that if you have new software, new features, you need new test cases to test them, right? But what you also want to consider is rerunning your previous test cases, rerunning or actually creating in the first place, regression test cases for your system, so that you can rerun existing tests every time you change the code. Every time you changing the code is not necessarily limited to just adding new functionality. Maybe you have a bug fix, maybe you change something else, maybe you fix one error, and you want to make sure that you don't introduce another error by fixing one error. So rerunning existing test cases is very important to make sure that stuff that you already have tested and defects that you already found and fixed, that they don't get reintroduced into the system, and that they don't get resurfaced every time you change the code. So again, the technique that we call in the testing world is regression testing. So I like that picture. It's funny, our fellow tester here, and walking away with a happy face, and then looking back, seeing that he's actually that they introduced new defects into the system. Okay, give me 1 second. So I have another one here, which I like as well, for the category understanding regression testing. So what we see here is kind of a payment a shopping website where we just introduced a new way of, we just added a new way of a payment option, or there's a new payment type option available. So you can see, you select the products here, you add it to the cart, you check out, paying by credit card was already in the system, and then you check out, you receive your products and receive invoices and bills. And this little area here is just, in this case, I guess they added PayPal as a payment option. So what, you see the circle here. So ideally you have a regression test suite that, covers all the areas of this, of this end-to-end process, or of this system, where you search products, where you add products to the cart, and, you try the existing payment methods, all that stuff you wanna actually retest by using a regression test suite when you actually introduce this new payment type here. So of course you're gonna have new test cases for this new payment type, and you most likely already have tested that, but the regression testing that is done here is you want to rerun the old tests to ensure that they that the new change code didn't introduce any new defects into the system. So I kind of like that picture because it kind of shows you the cycle. No matter what you add, no matter what changes you make to the software, to the system, that you are responsible for, you wanna have your existing test cases. Ideally you have them. If you don't have them, we're going to discuss this in a minute or two, that you want to build a regression test suite. So I like that circle. You can see here, you go back and forth here, and every time you do that, or every time you change the code, it makes a lot of sense to to test your application against regression, just to make sure everything is working, everything that your user or the user of the software is going through. Okay. So when you have a regression, or when you build a regression test suite, as we call it, a regression test suite contains all test cases of your system, old test cases that you want to rerun, and you want to add new test cases to that as well. And another thing you want to do is you want to grow the test suite over time with new features. I have a perfect diagram for that to show in a little bit, but for now, just a regression test suite should contain all test cases of your system. That being said, the second point here, if that is getting, most likely this is getting large, a lot of people have large and complex projects. So what you want to do as well is you want to organize that in a way that helps you to to keep things organized, to get a better overview. And if you grow your regression test suite over time, you wanna organize that in logical units and application areas, whatever it depends a little bit on your environment. It differs, you know, from system to system, but I'm sure everyone has a pretty good understanding on you know, how you can structure your tests and structure your tests by application areas or application functionality. The next point here is probably the most important one, and you know, why we do this webinar actually in the first place. You know, regression tests are very good candidates for automation. So maybe today you do a lot of manual testing, you do a lot of manual testing of the same thing, you know, over and over again. Every time you release a software, every time you have a change in your software. Why are regression tests a good candidates for automation? Well, number one, they should be executed very often, which, you know, is a good indicator for doing automation or for automating that very test case. If you do it often, because, you know, I will later explain a little bit that manual testing is still very important for development sprints and stuff. But for now, I want to highlight that, you know, typically regression test cases are executed very often and they are relatively stable, you know, especially when you compare them to new features that you introduce in the development sprint, in the 2-week sprint, 3 weeks or 4-week sprint, you know, where everything is still very dynamic. A lot of changes are happening. It's very hard to automate that, you know, in that kind of environment. So, but if you have existing functionality, if you have existing features, usually those are relatively stable compared to the very new ones you introduce. So very good for automation. Another benefit is when you automate that, you can free your resources or maximize your resources to actually focus on manual testing for that dynamic portion I just mentioned. You know, you have a 2-week sprint. Developers are still going back and forth. Requirements are changing. Your clients, you know, just requested something that they did not request 2 weeks ago. So there are a lot of changes in that kind of time frame. You want to consider manual and exploratory testing actually, and if you automate the rest of your test cases, you can actually do that. You know, you buy yourself time to do it, and you can actually concentrate on those kind of features, you know, where changes are happening, but changes are still happening in a, you know, very frequent kind of manner, and you wanna manually test that, but you don't want to manually test, you know, the regression testing that is, you know, launching the app, logging in, the, you know, the happy path, as I call it, you know, what the user is doing with the software, with the system, depending on what the system is doing, of course. But there's always kind of a happy path that, you know, a lot of users are going through when they use the system, kind of the 80-20 rule. 80% are using this all the time, and then you have your edge type cases for the 20%. So what are the next slide I have here is I want to talk a little bit about the you know, the testing types and techniques that you can use or that are common out there for regression testing, and I wanted to include that because we're going to see that in actually in RenRig Studio also. So the first one is what I call unit regression testing. This is done more, you know, by the developers, and most of the times on the API level, so there is no user interface. It's not the front end that they are testing, because remember, developers usually they build a functional unit, you know, sometimes deep in the system somewhere. They have the APIs to test that, but they should also you know, consider doing unit regression testing. It's not so important for this presentation today, but I just, for the sake of completeness, I wanted to add it here. What is important for us, or for, you know, user interface testing, when you test through the front end, you know, what actually your clients and your users are doing with your system. The first kind of type of testing is what we call smoke testing. So if you have a new build, if you have a new system, you introduce new features or new code, or you change the code, The first thing that you want to do is what we call a smoke testing or build verification testing. So before you do any other type of testing, you want to make sure, okay, can I launch the application? Can I log in? Because if I cannot launch, if I cannot log in, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense to to continue with the testing. If that doesn't work, then every test case that you have after that is definitely not going to work. So smoke testing is coming, I believe, from the hardware world, where they have, they build a circuit board and then they switch it on and see, okay, is there any smoke? If yes, okay, something is wrong. If not, great, everything seems to work. So that's where smoke testing is actually coming from. Again, smoke testing, build verification, quick tests. It's not a deep test. It's not testing all the functionality. It's just it's just quickly testing. Okay, am I up and running, and can I access the software? Can I access the system? So that's what is usually done with smoke testing. The next one here is called sanity testing, where you wanna specifically test the new functionality that you added, or the change code that you added, right? So there, for sanity testing, you have two goals. The first one, of course, is to make sure all my changes, is the new stuff, is the new functionality working as expected and as desired, right? So that's the number one. Number two is, okay, I want to make sure that my new code did not introduce any possible regressions. Did my code break anything? Everyone knows, if you in a symbolic way, if you change something on the bottom left corner, you change something on a top right corner as well, but you don't even know about it. Remember the first picture I showed you guys, where you introduce new bugs by releasing a feature. So that's why we have, or that's why we should do the sanity testing. Again, this is new changed code, and you should do that after you did some smoke testing, right? Then we have what we call complete regression and partial regression. So complete regression is of course taking longer, because you want to run your entire regression test suite. Usually this is happening when you have a major release. Every vendor is managing this a little differently, but at the end of the day, sorry, it's the same principle. For major releases, you want to run a complete regression, because you can assume that for major releases you have a lot of code changes. You changed a lot of code, so you wanna run a complete regression. So of course it's taking a little bit longer, but usually when you have a major release happening, then you have more time to test that too. The alternative to a complete regression, no surprise there, is a partial regression. So if you don't have time, if you didn't change, if it's not a major release, or you just added to a specific area of the software slash system, then you probably don't want to run the complete regression, but you want to, you still need to run a regression, but you can pick the areas that you think are high priority and make sense for that very change. If you can run a complete regression all the time, that's great, but probably you want to incorporate some partial regression test suite execution as well into the process. So again, we have unit regression testing. This is mostly done by developers. Then for us here, for this presentation or for this webinar, smoke testing on the UI, on the front end, user interface level. Quick build verification, if you want to call it like that. I kind of like that because it clarifies what it is. Then we have sanity testing, complete and partial regression. So those are the most common regression testing techniques out there. This one is my favorite because it gives a lot of information. It shows a lot on how the process works with regression testing. Remember, our initial idea of this webinar was, okay, how to get started with regression. not everyone is running in that ideal, fully developed continuous integration pipeline where everything is running by a click of a button. Maybe you have third-party software. You don't even have control over that. Maybe you have legacy applications that are still used in your organization and are business critical, so there still needs to be some testing against those applications. So it's not like someone is checking something into source control, into a version control system, and then everything is running automatically. We all aim for that. We all want to get there, but maybe we are not there yet, and we need to get started somewhere, right? So that's why we had the idea. Okay, we wanna help you guys to get started with regression testing. So without all the processes out there, without the ideal world kind of scenario. So again, this is what we all want to have. This is great, but maybe we need to create some milestones in between and take it step by step. So what we see here is the first bar here is, or the bars here are representing the RANREX test suite as a RANREX, or a regression test suite as a whole. So now this requires some initial effort, right? And when people say they need to automate everything within a 2 weeks development sprint, that's not going to work. So you need to do this outside of that sprint. You need to do this, you need to put in some initial effort to look at your system. Okay, what is important? What kind of workflows, what kind of processes do we need to test? What is business critical? What is high priority? What is medium priority? What is low priority, right? And then you need to start to build that, again, that what we call a regression test suite. And the regression test suite contains a lot of different test cases. But this is the first bar here. This is what you want to do. So some people do all that stuff manually, which is just getting worse over time, or or it requires more time over time, so I should say. And then some people have 10%, some people have 50%. There's not going to be 100% automation for everything, but if you can cover the most important test cases, the business critical ones, and we have a little information on the next slide on how you can do this, how you can tackle this, how you can get started with the metrics to find out, okay, what is new and what is important, what is high priority, what is medium, what is low. But you want to get started here. We want to start building this, and then once you have that, you can reuse that, and that's the key. That's the key when you do regression testing. You want to reuse your test cases over and over again. Remember, every time you have a new release, every time you have a new feature, you want to rerun the test cases that you did for the previous features, for the release that you do 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, if you have a quarterly release schedule. And then once you have that, in an ideal world, ideally, you just create when you have a development sprints, you can add the new functionality that you developed to the regression test suite, not in that current development sprint, but in the subsequent ones, in the following, the ones that, the subsequent sprints. Those are the sprints where you want to add test cases for the functionality that you released with the previous, or that you created and implemented with the previous sprint. This is kind of if you run if you are operating in an agile environment. Again, if you have a third-party software, then maybe that diagram looks very similar. You just add stuff. You have a good base here to get started with, and then you just add new test cases. As you move forward, and you categorize them. You say those are my high priority ones, and I need to add those. So. But this is a good example of how you can grow this, how we can grow the regression with new functionality over time. And here, don't think too much about development sprints, and you have to do this in 2 weeks. This should be done, in my opinion, outside development sprints to get started, to have an initial good coverage of the system, and then you run that regression test suite against new release candidates, against new bug fix candidates, whatever you have and whatever the situation might be. So the next one here is a little metrics to get to get a little help on how to prioritize regression test cases, right? I don't want to make this rocket science here, but because usually the testers, the QA people, they are the very experts on how the system works, on how the software works, on what the user of your system is doing and what they do and what kind of workflows they have to go through. And there are many ways of doing this. This is just one which we think is going to be helpful. So you have the frequency. Frequency means, okay, how often do people need this piece of software or this area when they go through our system? Everyone needs to log in, everyone needs to do this, everyone needs to check out. When we again take a look at the shopping website, everyone needs to be able to search products, check out, log in, pick a payment method, but not everyone needs to comment the product or the experience, or the comment section is probably not business critical. So the rule of thumb here is, okay, don't start with the most complicated and most complex workflow or scenario testing scenario that you can think of. Start with the easy ones and grow from there. And at the same time, when you want to also make sure that, okay, let's focus on the high priority, on the critical / high priority test cases first, and then we grow over time, and then we try to grow our test suite to add more and more test cases, maybe even from the medium and low priorities. This is a additional information here on how to prioritize regression testing. What I call the happy path, the test cases verifying happy path, which means, okay, all what the majority of the users of the system that you test, or the system under test, and they need to go through. That's what I call, or what we call a happy path here. For a web store, that would be launch, login, search, checkout, and payment, kind of. And there's a lot of additional stuff. I'm fully aware of that, but this is where you want to get started, right? And then we have what I rated here as medium is, okay, some edge type cases. If you type in something that is wrong, or the opposite of the happy path is the sad path or bad path, where you have where test some boundaries and edge type cases, and you have bad usernames and password to verify how this if the system responds properly with error handling. So, and there's no one size fits all, but this is a good practice. This is a best practice on how to get how to start prioritizing and rating your test cases and what you need, and where you should get started. Another very important point here is at the bottom: frequently review all test cases, to make sure, is this still high priority? Is maybe you need to change the priority? Is this still what we need? So it's building the regression test suite is not a one-time effort and you never touch it again. So it's a constant, frequent kind of effort, and you want to always frequently review the test cases. Hey, is this still good? Do we still need this? Do we is this area of the software not so important anymore? Do we need to add something? Do we need to add new test cases as high priority test cases? So always keep that in mind, that you need to frequently review the test cases in your regression test suite as well. Regression automation in agile environments. I want to give you a few tips, because the challenge that most testers face when they are truly in an agile environment with development sprints is the short release cycles they can actually create some challenges for the testers. And I mentioned that before. You know, you don't want to automate in the current sprint what you're currently developing, because most likely this is still very dynamic. Still a lot of changes are happening. Even if you even have a development sprint, you know, if you have third party or a legacy application where you actually, those systems are not part of those development sprints, then you can forget all of that. You don't need that. Then you just build your regression test suite, you know, as you move forward with your testing effort in general. But if you run in a dev sprint for newer software, and you know, you want to of course add to the regression test suite, you want to cover the newest, the new functionality and new software versions that you have as well, of course. So instead of creating the automation for the current sprint, just create, you know, build some time into this to create the automation for the features that you finished in your previous sprint or in the previous sprints, because most likely they are more stable, you know, compared to the brand new features. Also build time into sprint for manual. If you automate the rest, you have more time to actually, you know, test the very current stuff, you know, all the features that you're currently developing within the sprint. You can do some manual and exploratory testing against those features or those areas of the software. Again, apply some risk-based, you know, prioritization, or, you know, some sort of metrics that I showed before, in order to have a better understanding of, okay, what's important, what's not so important, and what do we need to test. It's always helpful. And then the next slide, which is, I believe, the last one, before I go into RAINWorks Studio and into the product, into the fun stuff. You don't need to run every regression. You don't need to run a complete regression all the time, remember. But you can run sanity checks, you can run smoke tests, you can run it overnight, you can run it 24/7. This depends a little bit on how many times you want and need to execute, but you know, running regression test suites overnight is a very common practice out there. And the last one here, I mentioned that earlier too. If you still do, or if you do a lot of manual testing, of the same kind of test scenarios and test cases, you know, think about starting to build a regression test suite outside of the sprints if you have that. And if you don't have that, then you know, you wanna include that into the process, into your testing and QA process. Start to develop that regression test suite, and again, start with happy path kind of scenarios, with, you know, easy to implement, easy to automate test cases, not the most complicated ones. Let's get started there, and then hopefully you see you see the return that, or the feedback, the fast feedback that automation can give you, and that you don't have to manually test the same things over and over again. Okay, that would be the presentation. So, right, the boring stuff. So let's actually start with showing you a little bit about RAINWorks. So what I have here, the application, when you use RAINWorks, we call, you know, our company is called RAINWorks, our product is called RAINWorks. But when you have RAINWorks, what you actually use is the software which is called RAINWorks Studio, right? RAINWorks Studio is the application that you use to create test cases, to create your regression test suites, your regression test cases. So the software uses RAINWorks Studio. It's a standard Windows software. You know, if you download the trial version from our website, then you have what you download is, you know, the common setup.exe file that you know from every other application as well that you install on your PC. It's the same with RAINWorks Studio. It comes with every, you know, it installs everything RAINWorks needs. So that's really the only thing that you need to install. So the process should be pretty straightforward. So please go ahead, test it out if you haven't done it yet. We are here to help you guys if you have any questions, but this is pretty much it. The first thing that you see when you open RainerX Studio is, our news feed, where we have some announcements of new features, webinars and stuff like that. The only thing I want to mention here before I get going with automation here is the sample solutions here. Those are pretty cool. You can open them. It's everything is done in there. Everything is finished. You can take a look how stuff is done with RainerX. There are plenty of examples in there based on technologies that you have. So this is worth to take a look here. You can learn by looking at those sample solutions. But enough with the start page here. So let's get started and create a project. So the first thing I did, I'm going to do this again. I create the solution with Wizard here from this link here that I have here, and then this is just a little wizard that helps you to get started. You can pick the technology, but this is just more convenience. It's not required. You can pick if you want to get started with desktop, web, mobile applications, or if you want to create a blank project. I'm going to do a blank project because I want to show you guys how to build everything from scratch. But even if you pick one here, you're not limited to that technology at all, because the way RainerX works, everything is included. By the way, when you install RainerX Studio, there is no additional plugin that you need to install for any kind of technologies, desktop, web, mobile. Everything is included out of the box. So it's just one standard installation package, and that's it. That's really all you need. I want to create a blank project and call this Regression Test Suite 1. Let's do it that way. And we're gonna finish this. I'm gonna make the real estate a little bigger here. And now what we see now is the main areas of RainerX Studio when you open a new project. So since I'm assuming this is all new for you guys, I'm gonna explain this real quick what it is. So again, what we just did, we created a RainerX project. RainerX project is this. RainerX project is embedded into a RainerX solution. So you can add multiple projects to one solution. So this is, you can organize this in a way that makes sense for you. There are plenty of options available that you actually should use. Then this is probably the most important, view for regression testing and for actually using RainerX in general. It's what we call the RainerX test suite, and there are some, there's a specific structure that we follow. There's a specific hierarchy that we follow. A test suite test suites can contain some logical folders. I'm gonna talk about that in a little bit, but at the end of the day, is what you're going to have is a test suite. You have test cases and you have modules. Modules are these little guys, and modules are actually where the automation action actually happens behind the scenes, right? And this is where you actually build your regression test suite. Remember, I mentioned sanity testing, I mentioned smoke testing. So this is where you build that structure. This is where you build a regression test suite. You create your test cases, you reuse your modules, but the terminology that we use in our RainerX world is this is the test suite. We have test cases, and the test case, they actually include that automation piece, where you actually automate an application or automate the software or the system, right? Which we call module. So in this case, we have two ways. You can use a low-code approach using a recorder, using our action table. We're going to see that in a minute. Or you can go fully with code as well if you want to build your own framework. And then, so this is what we call the test suite. And don't worry, I'm gonna walk through that in much more detail a little later when we have our first test. But I would say this is the most important, view for, regression testing, because this is actually where you build it. This is actually where you put all the bits and pieces together. Then here, this is just a project file view. Everything that you create within this RenderX Studio project is a file behind the scenes. So, and this is just all the files that you created, so that you can access them. Sometimes when we create the logical folders, we need to do it here. But other than that, this is not so much important here. This is just, and you can actually get rid of that view as well if you don't like that. And here, this is what we call the RenderX module process. So every module, every automation action that you create for regression testing is gonna show up here, and then you will see what we are going to do. We just take elements, or take modules and drag it into test cases here, and this is how we build out our regression structure. Okay, so again, the test suite, the most important one. Tests usually, you have test management software. I know I believe a lot of Testrel clients are participating in this webinar, so that you are familiar with the test suite concept. So we have actually an integration between RenderX and Testrel. So the test suite of Testrel and the test suite of RenderX have a very similar concept. Then you have test cases, and then you have the automation unit, or modules as we call it, right? So if I double click that, you actually open the module itself, and right now what you see is a whole lot of nothing. So there is nothing in there. There is no repository, there's no application, there's nothing, right? So there's no object, there's no automation, there's really nothing. So let's actually change that. And there are a couple of different ways of doing this, and it's completely up to you guys. If you want to use capture replay recorder, you can certainly do that. If you want to kind of manually create your automation actions, you can do that too. And I'm gonna walk you through that a little bit, so that you just get a better understanding of how we can create the automation piece with RenderX. And by the way, I'm not gonna go too deep into the details, because we have plenty of webinars available that just talk about this area and this area alone. So we actually have a couple of webinars next week that cover those, or that cover the automation piece here and how to do this, and all the in and outs and all the details of it. So I just want to give you guys an overview and then switch back to the regression test suite. But to get started, let's click record. So I just clicked that record button, and I moved over my RenderX recorder toolbar, what we call the toolbar, and so that you guys can follow. So I just, and this is a little application that I picked for demonstration purpose here. So when I click continue here, then we are actually what we call in recorder mode. You can see the mouse cursor is followed by this red circle or red dot. So this is indication that we are actually recording. Now, when you are in recorder mode, you wanna, this is now how you put together your test cases or your test scenarios, right? And I just move my mouse around and nothing is actually happening. Only if I click, only if I type, this is what RenderX is going to record. So and the first thing I wanna do, hopefully you guys see that too, when I move my mouse over this application, there is a red border, there's kind of a rectangle that is popping up around each object. This is just telling the user that RenderX identifies the object properly and that we see the object, right? So in this case, I want to type in, I want to move my mouse over that text box here. I want to click that, and I want to type in my first name, and you can see there's a live view of the recorder. So everything that we click, or everything that actually we record during the session here, we're gonna see this here on the recorded toolbar as well. Now I want to do the same with with the last name. I have a key sequence here. I want to pick a category. So I just go through the process. I add this person to the list here below. What I want to do, and then automation is a combination of, you know, clicks and key sequences. You drive the software, right? But you also, or automation, I mean test automation, I should say. Test automation is also, you know, about validation. What we call validation, other tools call it checkpoint or assertion. But what you want to do is you want to verify, okay, how is my software, how is my system behaving, right? If you just have input like mouse or keyboard input, you know, that's just, you know, half of it. You know, you also need to verify, okay, is my software behaving and reacting properly? So in order to do that, we have what we call a validate button here. It's the same principle. You can move your mouse over the objects, do actually validate against certain states of an object, certain, you know, what you expect. If you click this, you expect the software to do this, you know, to do a certain process right behind the scenes, and then giving you a status update or whatever, you know, the system or the software is doing. So in this case, I want to check if that count in this table is actually moved from 0 to 1. So I want to check that. I want to click that object here, and what Ranorex is doing is giving you a validation kind of wizard where you can pick up all the objects all the properties and attributes of the object. You know, the way Ranorex sees, so we do not rely on XY coordinates. So we really search and find that object, and we have access to all the properties and attributes of that object. So in this case, what I want to check is if the text equals VRB count 1. I say it said yes, and then I want to click this person again, and I want to delete that, and then I actually want to validate again if this turned back from 1 to 0. So I click that again, and Ranorex is giving me the structure of the application as well with this wizard. But again, I want to check this box and check against VRB count. I want to check against the text VRB count 0 to make sure it's 0 and not 1. And now I want to stop my recording, and you can see we have a couple of actions now in what we call our, you know, action editor. We have a total of 11 actions, and we just recorded those actions, right? So what we also have is we have a so-called object repository where we store all the objects of the application. You know, every action that you see up there from action 1 to action 11, and you can see there is no coding, there's no scripting, there's nothing, right? If you need that, it's definitely possible. I'm gonna, you know, depending on the time, I can still walk you guys through this, but this is pretty easy to manage. You know, remember what I mentioned during the presentation. If you start with the easy processes, with the easy test scenarios, this is the way you want to do it. For all the manual testers out there, this actually looks very similar, you know, compared to a manual test script, right? So action 1 is a mouse click against this first name object. So every action that you actually see there is connected to an object, because of course we need to know when we create an action, when we create automation, you know, against what kind of objects do you want us to perform that action. So the link between action and the object to perform the action against is very important information. But other than that, you see there's a mouse click, key sequence, another mouse click, then we have the validation here. We also captured the screenshots. So even if you work in a team, and you know, if you do everything on your own, you probably know what you did. But if you have team members and colleagues that need to take over, then this is also a good, kind of storyboarding that we tell here with the screenshots to just, understand what's going on, or to better understand what's going on, right? So, and I'm going to save everything. And before I continue to talk too much, I'm going to just run this, right? So we have now the automation. And what are we doing with this piece now? Great, we have automation. So what's the next step? Well, the next step is we want to execute this. We want to run this. And remember, when I created the blank solution, what RainRex did for me, it created a test case that is called test case. And then we have this module which we call recording one. So this is the template. This is what you see all the time when you create a new project, but we're going to change that as we move forward with this demonstration. But for now, I just want to click that run button and to see what's actually happening. And what should happen is that we are now actually automating that, or rerunning what we just recorded and automating that piece. I'm not using any mouse or keyboards, I promise. My hands are not using and operating my laptop now. So this is all done by RainRex automatically. So I type in first name, music, add the person, delete the person, and then we have a report file out of the box available. Want to expand all details, and you can see we log every single action. We have number one, we have everything is green, which is good. That means everything worked. So we have our individual actions here. Sorry, we have our validation that succeeded. We can, if you move the mouse, you can see there is a jump to item link that gets you directly to the very action of of the module, which is also very convenient when you need to track down an error. But this is pretty much the report file. Sorry, that is generated by the tool automatically every time you run a test suite, and it gives you information of actually what was going on during the test execution process. So now going back to the test suite here, we have a test case and we have a recording, and the recording, behind the recording we have, let me switch to that tab up there, we have actually the individual actions there. So I want to quickly show you that what I mentioned before is actually it's actually the case that the record is just one way of doing this. Let's say I want to, for demonstration purposes, I also want to actually, before I validate this text here, I want to move my mouse to the text, right? So what I do, I just take that element, which, by the way, when I right-click that element and say highlight element, oh, in this case it won't work because the VAP count is 0 instead of 1. So let's use it with this guy down there. If I now right-click, highlight element, and you're gonna see, hopefully you see that through the broadcast as well, that we highlighted that object here. So we can double check where this object is located. So if you should always use meaningful names. You should always use names that make a lot of sense out of the box, because it's just easier for everyone that is involved and working on that project to figure out what's going on, versus I'll give you an example, a bad one, XY 1 2 3 4. If I do that, by the way, you see we automatically refactor every instance where we use that object. So this is good too, because you only need to change it here. But if I use it with XY 1 2 3 4, that's not really good practice, because it's very confusing. No one really knows what that is unless you have system experts working on this. They know what this is, but it's much better if you do something like that, where we have first name, right? So what I wanted to do, I want to show you that I can, what happens if I need to change something now, right? Recording and capture replay is fine, it's great. But I do this once and then I need to change something. So what am I supposed to do now? Am I supposed to re-record all my steps again and lose all the work that I did before? No, definitely not. So what you can do, you can create new actions by simply taking an object here, you drag it up there and you say, all right, let me do this again. I drag it up there, release my mouse key, and then this is a context specific menu here. So only actions that are actually working against that very objects are or will be presented to me in this case. So what I want to do here, I want to actually move my mouse. I don't want to click it, but I want to move my mouse, and I don't want to have this as action number 12 because I want to actually do it before I'm validating it, right? So I move this, I make this action number 8. You see, I have my mouse move here now before I actually validate that. I want to do the same with the second validation. So I move that kind of between action 11 and 12. I release my left mouse key and then I say mouse, and instead of a click I do a move. And something else that I want to take I want to add a new action through that menu that you can see here. And what I also want to do is I want to add a screenshot, right? What we call here capture screenshot. So this ended up being action number 13, but I want it to be action number 8, my new action number 8. So and you see my object that I have here is not connected yet, so there's no item. So what I can do now, I can pick one from my repository below, and the one I want to pick is actually the parent element here. If I highlight that element, you see that we have highlighted that entire application here. So what I need to do is just simply drag and drop this into my no item where it says no item, and that's pretty much it. Or I can actually directly take that and say, oh, I want to actually do, okay, let me do this again. I take that element, that parent element, I drag it into my action editor here and say I want to do a capture screenshot, right? I can give it a message. This is screenshot number 1. I know I'm not very creative here, but screenshot number 2 is this guy, and I want to move this a little bit up, not the last action. I want to make this action number 13. So what I just did, I just created I added stuff to it. I added the mouse move. I can also change my key sequence here. If I don't want to have Andy Smith in there, I can also run a data-driven test easily. But for now, I want to actually go back to my test suite and run this whole thing here. Hopefully it works. Again, after I click run, Renric Studio is actually building the project for me. And then we added the screenshots and we added that mouse move before we do the validation. So now we are executing the test again. We have, again, our first name Andy, last name Smith, and then we add this person. We now should move the mouse to VOP count 1. That just happened. We delete that and we move the mouse down to VOP count 0. And we took a screenshot, and we should see the screenshots in the test report automatically. So I want to expand all the details, and here we go. So this is the screenshot. Remember, before we actually or after we added that person. So VOP count is 0. We can see that here. I want to close this out, and the second one should have 0 without with no person in the creator table here. Okay, so this worked perfectly fine. Now here's sorry. So this is again, and don't want to go into much detail. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of cool stuff that you can do. This is the objects here. They have what we call the Ranrex XPath. This is super helpful when you need to tweak the object recognition engine a little bit. You know, in this case, you know, ideally every application has unique IDs or attribute IDs for each object. That's the, you know, the ideal and best case scenario. But even if that's not the case, by manipulating the Ranrex XPath and using other settings of Ranrex, you can greatly tweak the object recognition engine in a way that is going to work against your application as well. So we do this every day. We help clients, you know, for most of the people, the object recognition works out of the box as is. They don't have to change anything. For more complex applications, you know, we have to tweak it a little bit, but again, we have options, which is great. So, but again, we have great webinars covering that piece of our software. I want to go back to the test suite and you know, talk a little bit about that. We have 30 minutes left, so hopefully that gives us enough time here. If you remember during the presentation I mentioned, you know, you should better organize. You should, if you have complex, large projects, it probably is very helpful and will prove beneficial if you organize your if you organize your project, if you organize your test regression test suite accordingly, right? So there are good options and plenty of options available with Ranrex. So and before we do that, before I show you that, I need to switch back one more time to break this down a little bit. We have 15 actions in there, and for the, you know, for better demonstration purposes, what I want to do here is I want to take the 4 actions here, for instance, the first one, the first 4 actions here. I want to right click those and say I want to move those modules or those actions, sorry, to a new module, right? And I call this module add person. And the reason I'm doing that is because this is helping us to build, you know, test cases and to reuse modules actually throughout our regression test suite. And then I have I can do this with, I want to call this add to list. Let's do it that way. And you see we have now a couple new modules in the module browser view on the left hand side here. And let me take these guys here and call these guys delete person. I want to save everything. And then what we have left is actually validation. So the recording 1, which is the initial template name of when you create a blank new project, let's call this validate, or yeah, let's call it validate list. Okay, so what we have now, we have a couple of different different modules here, right? So how can we reuse that? Or how can we organize this? So the first step, remember this, the project file view. The only thing why we need that is because we wanna create a new folder. Let's say this is regression, and we want to create a subfolder for let's say app1, and then we have, let's say, app2. You know, I'm just making this up to show you guys, you know, how you can, you know, better organize this how you can add 3, and then I can move my modules into the folders, you know, as I deem appropriate. Let's say let's move everything to app 1 for now. Validate list. Sorry, I'm gonna take this guy. And you see in the module browser, we mirror whatever structure we have up there, right? So this is how you're going to, or this is how you can create smart folders, and actually create, the regression test suite. So this is just a module browser. Think of the module browser of this is my repository where I have all my automation modules sitting and waiting to be used, right? So the module browser it's just like an internet browser where you have the entire internet waiting for you to be used. It's the same here. This is a repo, this is a repository. All the modules are going to be in that repository, and then where we actually build the regression test suite, where we actually create the test scenarios. This is again within this test suite here. So here I can also create what we call smart folders, where I say, okay, this is now my regression test suite, right? For instance. So I want to, and you can move this around, in any way you want. Regression test suite, then I can have a new smart folder where I say, okay, I want to do my smoke testing here now. Smoke tests, or I have my what did we learn? Sanity testing. We have sanity tests, and then I have my let's say complete regression. Then I have my take a guess, partial regression. So I'm gonna do this, and then each of those smart folders. Now what you can do now, you can create so-called test cases, right? Where we say this is, or actually let me do another hierarchy here, app 1, and then I can move my test case here into my app 1 folder, right? Actually what I don't need that test case anymore. So yes, I want to delete that. So obviously this is there's not a lot of test cases and modules in this project yet, but think about you have 100 modules, you have 200 test cases here, you have all of that is working fine, and where you actually should be. So how do we add automation, or how do we add modules to those test case here, which is I don't want to call this test case 1. I want to give it a meaningful name as well. I just say add, delete, the add delete test case for application 1, which is part of my smoke testing. The first step I want to do, I want to take that person here, I'm going to take that module here and drag it into my test case. And when we execute this, in a top-down kind of fashion. So we start at the top, and then we move down and execute everything that is checked here, right? So we started with add person, we added the person to a list. So I'm gonna add this module here, and it's a simple drag and drop. Then I deleted that person, so you want to move this a little here. And then the validation, I need to actually split the validation as well, because the way I have it now is not going to work. I want to move that to a new recording module. I want to give it to application 1 and say this is my validation, my val 1. and create that. And this one I want to call validation 2. So hopefully this is working better. And the way, and now validation 1, I want to move this right here. So I add the person, right? So if I double click that, remember we just did first name and last name. We specified that. Then we add that to the list. So we click the category and gender, and then we click the button add. So I could remove those as well, but I'm sure you guys get the idea what I'm trying to do here. And then I want to validate. Then I delete the person, and then I want to validate again if everything is cleaned up properly. So in that case, I need validation 2 here. Oops, I want to do this again here. So I save everything. Now if I run this, hopefully I didn't mess it up, but you can see, you know, this is the process of how you're going to build the regression test suites here. I didn't want to, you know, start and close the application every time or doing the demonstration here. But obviously this is what you want to add as well, right? So you want to add, you know, starting or launching the application, and you also want to close out the application. So you would have two more modules in my regression test suite that actually manage that. So if I expand everything, you see we automatically take over the structure, the folder that we have with smoke testing, application 1, add and delete, the add and delete test case, and you see the breakdown. So this report, the report file mirrors whatever you have built in your regression test suite here, right? So you don't need to do anything specific. And now what I can do, I want to show you this guy. I want to show you guys this as well. Now, how can I reuse the modules, right? Because you might think, well, this is great. I understand everything that I'm doing, but you know, this is a hard-coded value. So when I reuse that, then I'm not gonna be. I don't want to have Andy Smith all the time, right? So what you can do, so instead of using a hard-coded value here, you can actually create or connect a variable, and then you can connect that variable with an Excel spreadsheet or with a simple data table that you can build within Ranorex, within the test suite actually. So that way, if I do this now, I say this is my variable first, and my default value is, I always give it a default first, so that I know if I'm not connected, I use default first. So instead of a hard-coded value, I'm creating a placeholder pretty much at the end of the day. And I do the same thing with the last name here. I call it variable last. Sorry, I hit enter too soon, so I want to call this default last. Okay, so now instead of hard-coded values, I'm going to use a variable. So you can see something changed here within our regression test suite. The add person module is now saying I have 2 unbound variables. So what I can do now, I can create a so-called, I can right-click. By the way, you wanna get familiar with right-click. There are always great options available when you right-click Ranorex Studio. The one I want to use now is actually called data source. I'm going to create a simple data table within my test suite. So yeah, but again, you can connect that to an Excel spreadsheet. You can connect that to a SQL database. You know, wherever you have your data sitting or wherever you want to create your test data. I give this data source names as a name, and then what I add a column first, and I add a column last here, and I give it the one Johnny Depp, and the second one is Robert De Niro, for instance, right? So I'm gonna apply and okay that. Now I have a data source. Now I still need to connect the variables, but very easy. I just double click that, and then the only thing I have to do is I want to have my column first bound to column my column first to be linked to my variable first, and my column last to my variable last. I okay that. So now we're gonna run this with actually I'm just going to run this real quick. And see what's happening. So we should not use Andy Smith anymore. We should use Johnny Depp and Robert De Niro now, and run through the same process again. And then the way we did that is just by, instead of using a hard-coded value, we just created a variable using and using a data source that I just created. So Johnny Depp, we still say musician female, add. We do the validation. We delete that. Great. Everything is working fine. And now we do it with Robert De Niro. Now, the reason I'm showing this is because now we can reuse that module for another application or for another test, for a sanity test, for instance, where we use different data, right? So we have the report file, and the report file is gonna show us all the details again for all the steps that we performed. And we actually executed this test case twice, one for Johnny Depp, with the test data that you can see here, and the second data row we did for Robert De Niro here. Okay, so this gives you all the details that you need to know. What happened during the test run. Now, if I want to add that if I want to run this in my sanity test, so I can again create a new test case where I say this is add delete. Oh, delete one. Thank you, Rainrex, for telling me. I have another one for test case new stuff. I know this is not very creative, but now I can simply drag and drop this in there and add to list. There you go. Delete the person. So I could do the same thing or something else or whatever I need to do, right? So I can do, and here I can just create another data set, another data source with different kind of data if I want that. If I do not, so I can run it like that as well. If I don't connect any data source, we are going to use the default values that we have in there. So if you're okay with that, then that also works. And we do the same with new test case 1, and then we have test case 2. I'm sure you guys get the idea on how to do this, and this is how you can build your entire regression test suite, right? So once you have done that, another important piece or thing to consider is how do you execute all of that, right? Because we don't have a fully established, developed continuous integration chain. So what are the options for executing this, right? Very easy with Rainrex Studio, because everything that we built here, all the testing, all the the test suite, the regression test suite here. At the end of the day, what we actually generate is a so-called executable file. If I right-click my project and say I want to open the output folder here, you're gonna see that we have, we gave the project the name regts1, which is exactly represented by this executable file here. So if I would double click this now, that would actually kick off the same test again. So what that means is you can take that executable, run it on any test VM, run it on any test machine. Excuse me. And then I need to take a sip of water. And then you can send this to a remote RANREX machine even. You can include that in a Windows task scheduler. You can incorporate that into your continuous integration if you have that. Super easy to use. This is pretty much it. So if I can actually select and deselect stuff. Let's actually not run. Let's only run this one, right? If I do this and if I build everything now, and if I double click that executable file, we would execute the same test, right? Another great thing here is you can also create so-called test run configurations. So I'm going to show you how that works. I want to have my smoke test. What that is, you can have one test suite, one big giant test suite, but you manage that by creating test run configurations here. Let's say smoke test, we have sanity test, then we have complete regression, we have partial regression, right? So I create that. Now if I have everything available in my drop down here. For my smoke test, for instance, I only select my smoke test here. I'm not going to execute any of my sanity, complete regression, or partial regression test cases, right? So I want to save this. I'm sure you guys get the idea. I want to do the same with my sanity testing here. Only my sanity test cases are going to be executed. And partial regression is this guy down there. And if I have my complete regression, then I select this one. I save everything, and then I can have my default test run is actually everything, right? If I ever want to do that. But now what I can do, I can now switch from test run to, let's say, partial, and you can see only this guy is checked. And if I run this now, only my partial regression is going to be executed. And I can actually, if you have people that only execute the tests, we also have a tool that we call the test suite runner. I just started that. I want to move this over. So this is just to execute this. So you don't need a license for that. You can take this. Actually, let me actually open this. Open with my test suite runner. Okay. So that should open this again. The cool thing here is, number one, you don't need a license. Number two, you can select all the test cases. Oh, I did not save it soon enough. Sorry about that. But the idea is the same. So this is not RANREX Studio. This is now the RANREX Test Suite Runner. This is where you can if you want to, if you have the need to, you can actually execute your regression tests manually. If you have people that only execute, they can still select and deselect test cases here. They can use the test run configurations that I just created. I just didn't save it, or actually build the solution so that this is going to be carried over. and they can select, deselect. They cannot add new stuff because you can only do this in Ranorex Studio, but this is another good way of executing your regression tests. You just have this and you say run, and that's pretty much it. So we have 5 minutes left, and I'm going overtime. On my apologies. So Jackie, how are we doing?
Sure. Well, we've been busily answering questions in the Q&A panel, but there are a few that came up that I think would be good to address if we've got a couple of minutes. Several people have asked us about the integration between Ranorex Studio and TestRail. We have time to demo that, or at least show them where they can learn more about the integration.
We have, yes. So if you go to our website, or let's start there. So number one, we have integration. So if you have test cases in TestRail that are marked automation, you can actually import that into Ranorex Studio. So we have TestRail integration here. We can start the TestRail wizard, and looks like I'm still logged in, but you can import and export tests between Ranorex and TestRail. But what it does pretty much, let's start with TestRail, right? TestRail is where you manage all your test cases. So you have that, you know what you need to do, but you do it, you manage the test cases there, but you manually test that. So that's exactly the test suite and the test cases that you want to export to Ranorex Studio. And what you're going to see is a structure very similar than you see here, or very similar as you see here, sorry. And what you can then do, you can then actually add your automation piece, add those modules to those test cases, right? So that's one way. Or you have this regression test suite here, and I can actually sync that with TestRail, so, and actually also give you the results. So you actually kick that, you actually have the results in TestRail as well. So it works in both ways. We have, I believe, Jackie, we have even a webinar for that, right, with all the details.
Yes, we have it as a on-demand webinar, and there's also very detailed instructions in our user guide on how to configure the integration on both sides, in TestRail and in Ranorex.
Okay, but for now, for the people listening and watching now, I want to assure you guys that that integration works both ways. As you can see, there is we have built-in functionality within Ranorex Studio to talk to our sister tool TestRail, and you can sync back and forth test cases from Ranorex to TestRail and vice versa. And you can post the results back to TestRail as well, the automation results, the report files that you have seen before.
Okay. We also had a question about how does Ranorex handle dynamic controls?
Dynamic controls,
like web elements with dynamic IDs?
So dynamic IDs mostly are for web applications. With 9.0, we introduced kind of artificial intelligence feature where we automatically detect dynamic IDs and don't use them for automation, or don't use them for object recognition, because dynamic IDs, as the name says, is dynamic and changes every time you launch a new instance of the application. So it's easy. So Ranorex can easily manage that. There are options. This is one option. So number one, we automatically detect it, right? Detect it. Another option is you can tell Ranorex, okay, this very attribute, this very property of that dynamic ID, never use that to build the Ranorex XPath, meaning for object recognition. Never use that. Ignore that completely. So you can actually teach Ranorex what to do and what not to do, right? So that would be another option. A third option would be, okay, we have some applications where they have dynamic IDs, but only the second portion, the digital portion of it is dynamic, but the first portion is a name that we would like to use for object recognition. So the option that we have there is you can actually take that entire dynamic ID and just ignore the second half of it and only use the first of it by by implementing what we call a regular expression. So out of the box, it all depends on the application and how the application got implemented, but out of the box with 9.0 and higher versions or newer versions, it should work out of the box. If it doesn't, if you have any specific scenarios or environments, then the other two options I mentioned are definitely going to fix the problem for you.
Great. And it looks like we are at the end of time. I apologize for anyone whose questions we didn't get to. But Andreas, would you put up your email address? Do you have a slide with your email address on it?
Yes, sorry. I have even conclusions, but I guess we're going to send this out.
Yeah.
So the questions about this presentation. So if you have questions, please reach out to webinar@rainers.com. This is going to get routed back to me. And the same for contact@guruk.com. I apologize for running a little bit over, guys, but I could talk about this stuff all day long.
Thank you, Andreas, so much for this presentation today. It's been great. And just as a reminder for everyone that's still here with us in the presentation, actually we still have quite a few people with us, you'll be receiving a follow-up email with a link where you can watch a recording of the webinar. There will also be a follow-up survey, and we'd be very grateful if you'd fill that out for us and let us know how we did today. And with that, we're going to go ahead and say goodbye and hope you have a great day and a holiday weekend if you have a holiday coming up.
Thank you, everyone. And one last thing from my end, other than thank you, is if you have any questions, if you want to get started with regression testing, please reach out to us. Our team is happy to help and ready for any questions you guys have.
All right, thanks a lot, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.